Hi there, this is Andrew from the Big Idea podcast focused on food. Today we're going to be talking to Dirk, the co-founder of Piece of Meat, spelt P-E-A-C-E of meat, from Belgium. They're focused on cell-based meat, they're creating fat and liver, but the biggest thing they're focused on is how do you scale cell-based meat technology? How do you make it of a sizable quantity and sizable production so that it actually can make a difference? So today we'll be talking to Dirk. We'll be getting into it in a second. Thanks for coming along. And by all means, subscribe to this podcast so that you can get updates on a weekly basis as we bring new podcasts to you. Thank you. Okay, Dirk from Piece of Meat. How are you? Welcome to the Big Idea Podcast Food. Not Big Idea Food Podcast, but Big Idea Podcast Food, because one day we may do other podcasts around similar amazing categories. So anyway, Dirk, welcome to our podcast. Great to speak with you.
Thank you. Nice to see you again, Andrew. Been a while.
I know it's been a little while. Lots have happened since we last had a conversation.
Absolutely.
You look. I'm not sure if you look younger or older. We'll get into whether it's been a really great 6 to 12 months.
Handsomer. You can say handsomer.
Handsomer. Yes, I can. I don't know if you can be any handsomer from the last time I spoke
to you. Oh, yes, of course.
All right. So, you are the CEO of Piece of Meat. Why don't we get into what Piece of Meat is and what it's all about?
All right. Yeah, so Piece of Meat is actually the first cultured meat company in Belgium. I founded it with two of my co-founders back in August 2019. And we've been on a very spectacular ride ever since. And currently, we are focusing on upscaling the process regarding the growth of cultured fat. So growing fat in large bioreactors, aiming, of course, to reach production volumes sooner rather than later. And we have been very lucky that actually in our very short existence, we've already been acquired by another company called Meattech, who has rewarded us handsomely and who is giving the company all the opportunities that we actually need, not just our company, but I would say as an industry as a whole, to reach these upscaling milestones.
Okay, so there's a lot in there, and for you and I who have been, or you and me, who have been circling around this space for many, many years, all of that makes absolute sense. For those that haven't, let's just kind of very quickly touch on cell-based. So cell-based, just if you wouldn't mind, just give people a quick overview of what that is for those that are new to this.
Are you asking this every cell-based company?
You know, I haven't spoken to any cell-based companies yet.
Oh, okay, great. Okay. So I can give also a bit of technical information, just like on a high level. Is that fine?
However you would describe this to an investor that is sort of new to the whole space, or or maybe your aunt or your uncle or someone in the pub, the Belgian beer gardens or whatever.
Right. Okay. So yes, obviously we're all looking for alternative solutions for producing food, right? In the future, this will absolutely be necessary, and sources of alternative protein are one of the primary targets for many of us. We've decided to start growing cells. That means we're taking cells from animals. In our case, since we're working with avian species, we're isolating cells from eggs in a very early stage of the egg development. We're looking for very specific cells. We put them in culture, and then we start duplicating these cells until we have a lot of them, right? So we then create what is called a cell line, And with this cell line, we can start really culturing the cell platform. That means we start growing them in really large volumes. So starting from lab scale in Petri dishes or flasks towards, let's say, 2-liter bioreactors, 20 liters, 200 liters, 2,000 liters, and so on. And then, of course, we need to turn that into something, right? So once we have reached the limit of the cell growth, we want to turn it into something that we can process later on as a food ingredient. In our case, that would be fat, but we could as well transform that into muscle or into liver or in anything else, basically, that the cells allow themselves to be transformed in. And that, of course, depends on the cell type that you're working with. And since Piece of Meat is focusing on biomass production mainly, we're not so much involved in the, let's say, food science part, not literally, right? So after the acquisition, we split it up a little bit. So it's more MeatTech Europe who is focusing on the food science and really on the plant-based matrix that will be then combined with our cultured fat to turn that into something eatable. And then they, of course, need to focus on texture and taste and so on, while Piece of Meat as a company is primarily focusing on the biomass production. Obviously, taking into account that it needs to be a food ingredient as well. And this is where our main focus is right now.
So while you were so perfectly outlining, the whole process, and thank you for that, I was remembering I did have 1 or 2 conversations with cell-based companies, and I never asked them that question. And I wonder why, and I hope anyone who ever listens to those doesn't get completely confused about what cell-based is if they're not new to it. But I wanted to admit it. I wanted to mea culpa in case you listened to those and thought, he lied. We weren't the first. We weren't the first, and he made me do this, and he didn't make anyone else do this. I didn't. So I hope anyone listening to those other podcasts isn't completely confused by what we're talking about. Can I ask very quickly, you mentioned fat a few times. Why fat? Why is that a product or an ingredient that we need, given that we're trying to get fat out of foods? We're trying to get lower fat. So why focus on producing fat?
Well, this discussion around whether or not we need fat in our diet, I will leave that in the middle.
You're quite right.
But we do believe that one of the concerns currently with plant-based meat alternatives, for example, is that it lacks a bit in, let's say, in juiciness. It tries to mimic fat using plant-based alternatives such as palm fat or coconut fat. They're not ideal for a couple of different reasons. And there's also, of course, techniques that try to find solutions to make it more or less better. So what we're saying is, look, although these initiatives are really good, we can actually replace all these techniques by just one simple ingredient, which is cultured fat. And I can testify that cultured fat immediately brings the juiciness to the plant-based meat alternative. So this is a fact. This happens immediately by adding cultured fat to the mix of ingredients without any other kind of intervenience. And then again, since it is a animal-derived ingredient, comes from animal cells, we can actually also additionally offer the taste of animal fat to the end product, which again increases, let's say, the meatiness of the final product with just one ingredient. So that's why we believe in it, and I think many others share this opinion, at least from what we can see.
So a couple of things. One is by creating that cell-based fat, it enhances the taste, as you say, of plant-based foods. It makes it much closer to the original that we're all trying to get to in terms of the target. obviously, because you're replicating those cells from a very small number of cells, it's far more sustainable than just taking it's someone might be listening to this and be a bit confused. Are they taking fat from animals and then they're sort of just taking that fat and adding it to plant-based? Why is it then plant-based? The reality is those cells are being grown outside of the animal, so far more sustainable in terms of water, livestock, space that we would need if we were using it, if we were growing the animal, the food, all of the normal arguments against kind of pure factory farming and animal protein. I guess one question I have is, and I know the debate is raging, but is cell-based vegan, or is cell-based non-animal at the end of the day? And I know that there are vegans out there who are quite happily trying their cell-based meats and saying, I'm fine with this. And there are other vegans out there who are saying cell-based, I would never touch this because it's still derived from an animal. I
think both options are right. It means it is still from an animal origin, but obviously no single animal has been slaughtered for it, right? So if you're a vegan because of ethical reasons, I think you could actually choose cultured ingredients as part of your diet. If you are having health issues because of animal origin compounds, then I understand that you also stay away from cultured ingredients. But it's up to the consumer to decide what he or she prefers, right? So we can only offer this as another option to the diet, and some people will choose to try it and to continue eating it, and others might just try it once or not at all, and then just continue with a completely plant-based ingredient, which is of course a diet, which is of course also fine.
Perfect.
Yeah. So I just want to maybe come back to what you mentioned about sustainability, because I think that's an important subject. In general, I would say the cultured meat industry wants to do better, right? But we still need to prove that we can do better. We are saving animal slaughter. That goes without saying. Normally, we will be using less land, and our intention is to use less water and less energy. But even when most recent studies are showing very promising numbers, there is still, as far as I know right now, not a single company on the planet who really went into full-scale production. So we don't really have real data yet. And I'm always a bit not on a pessimistic side, but on the realistic side. We really need to figure out if this is really as sustainable as we all want to. And it will be, I'm sure, but we still need to prove it. That's just the only thing what I wanted to say, especially when it comes to the feedstock of the cells as well. So we need to make sure that whatever we feed our cells, so they can grow and turn into meat or fat or anything else at some point, that also is sustainable.
You're absolutely right. I think the logic tells us it should be more sustainable because we're growing these cells in ultimately more increasingly larger numbers in a commercial environment. We don't need the acres or the land that we typically need to grow X number of thousand pigs, chickens, cows, etc. We're not having to give them water for their lifetime. We're not having to feed them for their lifetime. We're not giving them a lot of antibiotics. For cell-based, you don't need lots of antibiotics to keep them healthy in those kind of environments. So logic tells us it should work, but you're right. And I've talked about this before. Right now, there are a number of small teams of people around the world getting very, very excited and enthusiastic about the potential and the opportunity and what they can do in their labs and in their clean environments. But only a few companies are trying to right now commercially scale it. You guys are one of them. maybe you could argue Memphis Meats would be, if they rebranded, anyway, whatever. Memphis Meats are also a company that's pushing to commercialize the scale of cell-based production. But you guys are, I don't know many others that are trying to do that yet. So in terms of proving it, the jury's still out.
Yes, correct.
All right, let's go back in time just a little bit. Let's talk and please kind of take me through the history of Piece of Meat, i.e. how you guys got started. Was it you and another chap in in a coffee shop somewhere who just sort of had this moment where, why don't we do this? How did it all get started and what were the motivations?
Okay. Well, before it actually started for me, I was fully into blockchain technologies. So I'm an engineer by education, and I've worked in IT for more than 15 years. And for the past 15 years, then in blockchain technologies, before actually deciding to switch my career focus and also dive into other industries. Now, in general, I've always been driven by technological innovations. So many things have always been on my radar, and I've always tried to build prototypes in one direction or another. But it wasn't until I was approached by an artist couple, actually, who wanted to know about the status of cultured meat in general, to see whether or not they could do some of the crazy things that they had in mind back then already a few years ago. And since I was accepting also assignments a little bit as an innovation consultant, I took on the job, and I connected with Mark Post, and he got me some great insights in what cultured meat was and how it was really made. So I literally witnessed how they produced the first cultured meat burger back then. And I was completely blown away. I mean, it's like, wow, this is amazing, first of all. And second of all, I could see all the problems, all the challenges, all the shortcomings. And for an engineer, that's fantastic, right? Because we love problems. We love problems because we want to solve them. Mm. And afterwards, I was like, okay, look, this has sparked my interest, to say the least. And so I started digging into the science a bit, the technology. I started spreading my wings a little bit, reaching out to people, connecting, expanding my network a little bit, and pitching few crazy ideas. And back then it was just me, myself, and I. And I remember I once sent in a pitch to New Harvest with a team slide that had really like me, myself, and I in there, like with 3 different pictures and 3 different names. Obviously, I didn't get any grant, but I was an IT engineer, right? So what do you want? But nevertheless, I did find people who did believe in me, in the driving force, in my energy, the dynamics, the vision of where I wanted to go. And in Belgium, I really started putting together some pieces of a puzzle that I could potentially help solve. And that was around cultured foie gras, in collaboration with the Flanders Food Organization, for example, and KU Leuven, to name just a few of the people in that consortium. And at the same time, I was saying like, okay, this is just too much for me personally. I really need other people on board who share this vision, who really want to do this together with me, literally. And soon after, I met David, and I met also Eva. We worked together full time for a couple of months, and after that, we decided, okay, we've now come at a point where we need to formalize this collaboration, and we decided to incorporate Piece of Meat in August 2019.
And it's Peace, P-E-A-C-E of meat.
Yes, so bringing peace to the meat industry.
Fantastic.
Yeah, because it's my opinion that whatever we do in the cultured meat space, we can do that, of course, for vegan products or let's say alternative meat products. But we could as well do that for the conventional industry, right? I mean, in a transitional period, it's a bit weird to imagine that cultured meat will disrupt the conventional meat space just like that. That's not possible. I mean, everything is an evolution, right? We need to work together. There's a lot of knowledge and experience also in the conventional meat industry. There's many ways to collaborate with both the conventional meat industry and the plant-based meat industry or the vegan industry for a cultured meat company, that is, in my opinion. And that's why I thought the word piece of meat was actually well chosen. Like, we can work with all the industries. It's like a good middle way. It's practical. It's solution oriented, and it really avoids going into conflict constantly with one another.
Yeah, I'm never sure why when disruptive companies come along, people consider that to be threatening, and it's going to ultimately replace or get rid of the existing companies in the traditional industry. Now, it may change or evolve the traditional industry, but the existing players, the people that were there first from a corporate company perspective, they have a good understanding of the channels of distribution, of the consumer. They've got
Absolutely.
They've got things to bring to the table, and if a technology comes along that disrupts, it's an opportunity to improve as opposed to replace completely and start all over again. It just seems
correct.
To
correct. Yeah. It's like, for example, if you would create some kind of synthetic beer. Just by the push of the button, you can get any type of beer that you want from a machine. It doesn't mean that the traditional breweries will cease to exist, just because there's another kind of technology that, of course, has a lot of benefits also when it comes to sustainability, right? So you stop shipping 90% water worldwide, etc. But it doesn't mean it will replace an industry that is thousands of years old. It just doesn't happen overnight.
Absolutely. So you mentioned that Piece of Meat was acquired. I think you mentioned 3D Meat Tech as the company that did the acquiring. Take us, as far as I know, and maybe I'm sure you know better than I do, were you the first cell-based company to go through an acquisition with a public company? Is this a world's first, or is this this happens all the time and we just don't necessarily see it because it's all behind the scenes?
I'm not focused on these kind of things, but it might well be, yes, that we were the first company to be acquired in the space. Just as we might also have been the first company to have been given a significant government grant. So we've received 3.6 million euro with a consortium of players in Flanders to work on cultured foie gras in December 2019 already. And as far as I know, there was no bigger grant given to any cultured meat company, at least by a government, until then. Just as I'm saying, as far as I know, I don't think there has been another company acquired in the space yet. Yeah.
Got it. So take us through that process. Obviously, there might be things that you can't talk about, or so if that's the case, obviously don't, and you won't anyway. But take us through, as you guys started it, then David and other folks came on board. 2019, you got a great grant from Flanders, etc. Very supportive from the government, which very forward thinking of a government at that point in time. What you guys were obviously driving this forward. What made the decision to even consider an acquisition? How did that start? How did that conversation start? And what were some of the thought processes either you had as a person, individual, or as a team in terms of that potential exit?
Yeah. Well, when the question was first asked by MeatTech, we were all surprised, and we didn't even believe it. Like, are they for real? Like, I mean, right? Obviously, we realized that we were making a lot of progress really fast. I think that's one of the characteristics of our team. We move fast. We're very dynamic. We act fast, and the whole team that we have also built today is like that. Yeah. So after a while, we started accepting that idea. At least that offer was also on the table. So we started discussing it. In parallel, we also had the option to go for the typical, let's say, VC investment option. Mm-hmm. With a very good lead investor and some great follow-on investors. And actually, around the same time, we had 2 contracts, like fully prepared by all the lawyers. Just what was missing was a signature here or there. VC acquisition. So what do you pick? So what was for us the decisive moment was that we realized that if we would go for the acquisition, mm-hmm. that we would have available to us for the next 2 years the double of the budget that we would have if we would have chosen the other option. And since we are primarily focused on upscaling the production, and since we realized that we need a lot of resources for that, just having twice the amount of budget to go there was for us like a very important argument. I don't need to tell you that, this wasn't decided overnight, and that we really had many discussions on which way to go. But in the end, the balance tipped towards the acquisition, and that's what we did, and we haven't regretted it any single second.
Perfect. So now you've got double the resources to execute on your mission and your growth. You said you haven't regretted it for a single second. I'm sure you're being absolutely frank about that. Did it create any change in culture or any change in how you guys work as a team, or what you need to do to kind of move the business forward, or is it basically exactly the same and they're just sort of letting you get on with it, and life is exactly the same, but now you've just got a lot more money to execute on the mission?
It's even going a lot faster than before. That means we're hiring people on a continuous basis. We're buying equipment on a continuous basis. People are certainly cursing behind my back, because of all the people and the stuff coming in continuously. We've doubled the size, or even tripled by now, the size of our lab space. And we're already thinking like, oh man, this is going to be too small as well, maybe, who knows, by the end of next year. Yeah, so it gives us a lot of challenges, right? And as you know, I love challenges and I love solving problems, but the others in the team also need to follow me and David, and they are, and we're trying to create a really healthy environment, obviously, for people to work in. But yeah, we're making good progress, and we're really moving even faster than we did before, and that, of course, is a change. Yeah, that's clear. On the other hand, you could argue, okay, I'm not a shareholder of Piece of Meat anymore. That's correct, but I'm also now a shareholder of MeatTech, right? So for us, that really didn't change a lot. Although you could say that since we are also milestone driven, that might interfere with, let's say, the decision-making process once in a while, but it really doesn't, So since our objectives have been very clear from the beginning, that is to reach upscaled production volumes, we are now, let's say, at the liberty, between parentheses, to, go all the way, at least for 2 years, and that's fantastic.
So 2 things I'd like to cover. One, I hope I remember the second thing by the time we've talked about the first thing. Give us just kind of a quick snapshot, not over time. You started, there was you, then you added David, and who was the third person again?
Eva.
Then you got the $3 million grant, then you sort of grew the business. Take us through, you mentioned you've been adding more and more people to the team. What's been that growth like from a people and a team perspective? So you've gone one to three. Take us through some of those sort of milestones. Where are you at now, by the way, in terms of people?
Honestly, I don't know anymore.
I thought you were going to say that. Sometimes I say the same thing.
Yeah, I also don't think it's really relevant, right? The number of people. It's like when I last checked the numbers, there were 10 people on the payroll, right? Yeah. Since then, we've interviewed and hired even more, so I don't really know anymore. So we're less than 15, that I know. Okay. But we're hiring on a continuous basis.
I think the reason I'm asking is because any founders, any entrepreneurs out there, I want to give them sort of an order of magnitude of, this is the kind of pace of growth that you might experience as a new founder. So I'm not necessarily interested in you saying, well, we had 3 here and 7 here and 12 here, as much as we've doubled and trebled over the last 12 months. And the other question I think they would be interested in if they were founders listening to this is, how do you, one of the things most founders, CEOs, and early stage teams do is try and think about the culture that they want to create in their firm. They want to do things maybe differently than companies they've worked in the past or that they've seen in the past. How do you try and keep hold of that culture or make sure that the culture grows in the right way as you're scaling from a recruitment perspective so quickly? How do you hold on to what's special about Piece of Meat and what you've been building so far?
Yeah, that's actually a very good question, and it's not an easy task, right? I mean, growing so fast, in all honesty, I would prefer that by the end of the year, Piece of Meat is already with 20 people, because we definitely need that many people. There's just so much things to do, so much roads to follow and paths to explore. There's really enough work for even 40 people, let's say. But realistically, I would say if we can get to between 15 and 20 people by the end of the year, that would be already great. And next to that, to answer your question, yes, we talked about that a lot. In the beginning, we grew organically, but then you need to really start implementing some kind of what Professor Paul Modziak, our Chief Scientific Officer, would say. We need to implement a chain of command, right? So Dr. Modziak, as the CSO, is responsible for the scientific team. After a while, he also decided to divide the people into small teams. And now these teams have gotten also team leaders. Underneath each team, the number of scientists is growing. One of the teams is already relatively big, so there might be also like sub-teams coming. So we try to do that a little bit still organically, but at the same time also better organized and with a clear, let's say, reporting chain. So normally things do not easily turn up on my desk anymore, like the smaller issues. Although it's still possible, right? Because I'm always there on the floor. But nevertheless, by respecting a little bit the chain of command and the team leadership and the different teams growing in different directions, still working closely together, we have been so far able to manage it quite well, I would say.
Perfect. How would you describe the Piece of Meat culture?
Nuts. Yeah, I mean, like I said, I think in general we're a very dynamic, result-driven team, and internally we make a lot of progress very fast, and we have the resources to do it. So this is really typical for Piece of Meat, a very dynamic, open-minded company. Everybody in there really goes through it all the way and is, of course, passionate about what he or she is doing. And that's how we like it. That's how it should be. And of course, I hope and pray that we can continue to keep this spirit also in the future when the team grows bigger. It will become a challenge, but we will do anything we can really to listen to everybody, not to just impose our commands, but really work with the people, give everybody a voice, these kind of things. We've been doing it also in the past, and we will continue to do it, of course, in the future.
Perfect. You mentioned a few times when describing the choice between the VC term sheets and the supporting VC investors versus the acquisition. You kind of talked about a 2-year cycle of resources ahead. So, you decided to choose the acquisition because you've got 2 years of double the resources. What happens, what happens at the end of that 2 years? Is that about getting a new budget, or I'm wondering why that 2 years is a thing?
That was basically part of the conditions of the sales and purchase agreement, right? So some conditions have been put forward, have been negotiated, and we decided upon a 2-year trajectory to reach certain milestones together. So that's why the 2 years has been embedded into this agreement. Afterwards, of course, we will continue, right? We will not stop at certain volumes. We need to go to fully operational factories. And for that, we need obviously still a little bit more than 2 years. But we're already planning this and talking to governments that we can work together with, in different countries as well. We're based in Flanders, and Antwerp, city of Antwerp, and the Flemish government have been highly supportive of us. So we're, of course, also very happy to continue that collaboration. But we're working towards bigger scale factories. For that, new investments will need to come on board, and so on and so on. And that's then a different kind of focus, right? I mean, or an additional focus, let's say. So you will probably hear us talking more about what we are doing now until the end of next year. But what comes after is, of course, the continuance of what we're doing today.
Absolutely. So you mentioned that Flanders was forward thinking versus most other governments by backing you guys, by giving a good size grant on the Cellbased side. As you know, today, and the only country that allows the sale of cell-based meat, seafood, or dairy is Singapore. Do you see Flanders, because of that forward-thinking approach, that they'll be a country that will deregulate and allow the sale of these cell-based products for human consumption? Or is that just, obviously you've got so many other things to worry about. Maybe that's not on your radar screen at all. But what would be your prediction of either other countries or Flanders in particular, as far as allowing the consumption and sale of these ingredients?
Yeah. Well, I think like all European companies, we will go for European approval. It's called the novel food procedure that we all have to go through. So once we have reached the final stage of our prototype, that means a real prototype that is ready to go into production as the next step, not what I would call a proof of concept that you can take a picture of and write an article about. Once you reach a real prototype stage, then you can file for regulatory approval. You go through the novel food procedure. It still takes some time because this includes many different steps, many different tests, and so on, before you can actually get an approval for your product as a food ingredient. And this is what we're going to do. We didn't start that yet, but obviously we have been we are well prepared. We know what to do, where to do it, and with whom to do it as soon as we've reached that prototype stage. And I cannot tell you when that will be, but the sooner the better, obviously.
So 2 steps, at least, well, multiple steps, but 2 big milestones. One is getting the production, the technology, etc., to the point where it's a commercially viable product. Mm-hmm. And second, then you would start going through the novel food. Is that what you called it? Novel food.
Yes.
Approval process with the European community.
Correct.
Does anyone have any kind of suggested timelines of what the European community would, of how long the European community would typically take to go through that process? Is it a 1 year or a 5 year process or somewhere in between?
As nobody has done it yet, I cannot tell you how long it will take, but we're expecting around a year, approximately, hopefully. Yeah. I'm not expecting less. Could also be a year and a half, who knows? But some company needs to do it as the first cultured meat company. Might be us, might be one of our colleagues, I don't know. But it's important that, in my opinion, it's important that you wait until you've reached a very mature prototype stage. Mm-hmm. Otherwise, it's a waste of money and time, because you have to repeat the process if you change your product. Today we could also create, let's say, plant-based nuggets with our cultured fat inside, and sell that to the customer. That's perfectly possible. We could do that, and like in a restaurant, but we're not doing it because we're like, okay, this is not our final product. If we want to create a hype, yeah, we could, but we prefer to focus on the development.
But I don't know that you'd be allowed to sell it though, would you?
No, we wouldn't, exactly. Yeah, but we could do it in Singapore, for example. Yeah.
Okay, so got it. So in terms of other countries, do you see this? Is this something you guys need to do in Europe? And once you've done it in Europe, then you'll be limited. Not the being able to sell something across Europe's not limited, but you wouldn't then be able to sell it in the US. I guess what I'm wondering about is, do you need to get approval company by company in the cell-based category? So you guys would need to get approval for your product in Europe, and then you would need to go and get approval for your product in North America, et cetera, et cetera. Or is it cell-based needs to get approved, and once it's done that, you guys will be able to sell your product in multiple markets who have signed on, if you like, to the fact that cell-based is identical at the cellular level to the meat we've been eating for hundreds of years.
As far as I know, every single company will need to apply separately. And when it comes to region, yes, we'll have to apply in Europe as well as in the United States, as well as in Asia, etc. Once multiple companies have applied, maybe there will be some changes in the regulatory framework. That, of course, I cannot predict. But I think it's logical that every single company needs to apply, because every single company is using different techniques, different processes, different cell types, for example, different feedstock. So all these kind of things are important for the regulator to know and need to be very well documented, including, of course, also where the genetic material comes from. It's very important that the animal cells that you are using are actually also allowed to be used for commercial purposes. That's why we have always said from the very beginning, like, oh, look, okay, if we're going to use the genetic material of a certain animal, we need to talk to the breeders, because they need to give us permission. And we know that there are certain breeders out there who do not give permission to cultured meat companies to use the genetic material for commercial purposes. So you have to be careful where you get your cells from.
So there's like a copyright equivalent for animals, where if you buy an animal and from a farmer, the farmer owns the copyright of that animal?
I wouldn't say it's a copyright, but imagine that you have a breeder that has spent decades on developing a certain species and really making money, in our case, with the eggs and with the animal cells, with the animals, like for meat or for the eggs. And then all of a sudden you just buy, let's say, hundreds of thousands of eggs, what you want to create your cell line with. And then you say, okay, that was been nice, we've spent a few $1,000s with you, but now we're going to say bye-bye, and we're going to use it to disrupt your own industry. They will not like that.
Yeah.
So, yeah. It's only logical, right, that you just work together and that you make damn sure that whatever source that you're using, that you have a good agreement with the breeder.
Perfect. So one more question before I ask the last question that I normally ask. The one more question is, you guys started early. What year did you start in? 2018, 2017?
August 2019.
2019. You guys got $3 million from Flanders. You ended up getting investment from us and others. Eventually, you guys got a big chunk of change for the acquisition by 3D Meat Tech. If there are founders out there who are like you, engineers who see problems that need to be solved, well, actually, if there are engineers out there who are looking at this and thinking, is there still problems that need to be solved? Can I add value to this, this category of cell-based? Are there already enough companies solving these problems like you guys? Is there still room for somebody to start from today or tomorrow and kind of get involved in this industry and this opportunity, or are all of the good seats at the table already taken?
Absolutely not. So if there's one thing that I can immediately tell those people is that we, or the industry in general, in my opinion, desperately needs sustainable solutions for the feedstock of our cells. So we're using several compounds in our medium that our cells need and eat to grow, to duplicate and to turn into muscle or fat or anything else. We need products like amino acids that are sustainable. And today we're on a quest to find out how sustainable the compounds that we're purchasing from established suppliers are actually sustainable or not. Right? What is the ecological footprint of these compounds? We need to know. And I'm a bit afraid that we will not like the answer if we find out. Yeah? So any initiative working on sustainable compounds for the media that we're using, I would embrace that immediately.
So there's a scientist or a couple of scientists in a lab somewhere who are wondering, where do they go now with their future? They could be the answer to this problem, or one answer to this problem, if they start dedicating their time and thoughts to solving some of these problems. In other words, there's still enough problems, challenges, opportunities, innovations required for the cell-based industry for many people to be busy for decades ahead.
Absolutely. And that's just one example. And there's many other examples I could give.
Awesome. So where would people get a hold of Dirk and Piece of Meat if they wanted to become one of your ever-growing team of people, if they wanted to, support what you're doing, somehow get involved? Where would be a good place for them to engage with Piece of Meat?
Find me on LinkedIn, invite me for a beer.
A real beer or a synthetic beer that doesn't require shipping?
A molecular beer, that would be nice.
That would be lovely, wouldn't it? So give people your LinkedIn, your full name so that people can find you on LinkedIn.
Okay, that's a challenge. So you have to look me up under the name Heinrichshorst, which is German. That's because I've lived many years in Germany, but I'm not German. And you spell it as follows. It's Heinrichshorst. If that doesn't work, just Google Piece of Meat and you'll find our website and our LinkedIn page.
And Piece of Meat, again, for folks, is Peace, P-E-A-C-E. Is it piece-of-meat.com, or is it?
Correct, yes. So Dirk at pieceofmeat.com with the hyphens also works.
Awesome. So if anyone needs to find you to give you help, love, and support, those are some of the ways they can do so. Any last thoughts before we ring off for today?
Not really. I wish everybody a great day and a lot of inspiration, right? So for me, technological innovations have driven my entire career. And I know that's the same for a lot of other people. And while innovating, we're trying to create, say, a better world for everyone, and that's the main driver of many of us, and that's also something I wish to stimulate. That we need to keep doing this, and hopefully that leads to really great discoveries also in the near future.
I think that's a perfect way to end this. Also interesting that of all of the things you've tried to accomplish in your career, some of which are, potentially changing the world, tackling daily enormous challenges that are reinventing or evolving an industry, the most difficult thing for you is actually finding you on LinkedIn using your German name. So I think of all the problems you've encountered, I'm surprised you think that's the most difficult. All right, Dirk, I've really enjoyed having a conversation with you. Again, anyone listening to this, if you want to reach out to Peace, P-E-A-C-E, of Meat, please do so. Super great team, super great people doing amazing things. I'm going to thank you very much, Dirk, and I'm going to pause the video.
Perfect. Thanks again.
So I hope you enjoyed that conversation with Dirk from Piece of Meat. Thanks for coming along today. I hope you do subscribe to this podcast so that we can give you updates as we bring them to you on a weekly basis. So if you have questions or comments, please do reach out to Dirk or to us. Please do like and subscribe. Thanks a lot. This is Andrew from Big Idea Ventures, and this is the Big Idea Food Podcast. Many thanks. Until next week.